This is ACI Course 1, The Principal Teachings of Buddhism. We're at Class 9. What is the correct view of emptiness? Last class, we completed a discussion of bodhicitta by going over the 7-step cause and effect method of generating bodhicitta. In brief, the method starts once you have a feeling of equanimity towards all beings. Then step 1 is to recognize all beings as one's mother. Step 2, you'll feel a gratitude for their kindness. Step 3, you wish to repay that kindness. And then step 4 is loving kindness, which follows from the first 3 steps, and it means that you want to make all beings happy. Then in step 5, which is great compassion, you realize that you can't really make them happy until you remove their suffering and pain first. So you want to do this next. In step 6, you realize that it's so important that you're going to do it personally, even if nobody else helps you. And that leads to the final step where you realize that, hey, unless you become a Buddha, you can't really help everybody effectively. So you desire to become a Buddha to benefit all beings. In this class, we're going to begin our discussion of the third principal path, which is correct view. At the end of this class, you will understand what the 2 truths are and why they are not truths. You'll understand what is meant by dependent origination. You'll know the 4 great Buddhist schools of ancient India and how they differ in terms of dependent origination, and you'll be able to describe no self. The third path is correct view. It is having the realization of what emptiness is. Emptiness can also be referred to as ultimate reality, and you'll hear me say that term instead sometimes. An understanding of emptiness or ultimate reality really starts with an intellectual understanding that is based on study and analysis. This course is designed to give you a foundation needed to then directly experience emptiness. At the end of the 18 courses, you will have invested about 1,000 hours in study and analysis. A deep understanding, intellectual understanding, then leads to a direct perception of emptiness during deep meditation. And that direct perception, that realization of emptiness on that level, then gives you the power to transform your complete life and create yourself a Buddha paradise. The 2 truths are what you need to understand first in order to perceive emptiness. The first truth is a preliminary to seeing emptiness, and the second one is seeing emptiness itself. First, we need to talk a little bit about nomenclature. These are referred to as the 2 truths, but in actuality, they aren't 2 divisions of truth. They're not even really 2 things that make up one truth. They would be better described as 2 realities. And let's see why. The first truth means completely deceptive or fake truth. So we're already saying, wait, how can a truth be completely deceptive? So we've got a completely deceptive or even fake truth. And this is referring to our conventional reality, how we see things every day. It is the way we normally see things, and it's how things appear completely different from how they are. For instance, when we see a cylindrical object that is white with black ends, and maybe blue ends, and maybe a cap, we automatically perceive it as a pen. And we assume that all beings would recognize it as a pen, just kind of automatically. Even though we might realize, if we think about it a little bit, that if a dog came in the room, they would see it as a chew toy, and a human from another culture might see it as some sort of white stick. So when we look at stuff, what we see is completely deceptive, since we're seeing it as if it's a solid, fixed truth. And this is what the first truth is all about. Although it is called a truth, it really is more of a way we see things, and I like to think of it as deceptive reality. So the normal way, or the conventional way we see things, is deceptive or fake. Things appear to be one way, and in reality they are a different way. They appear to be solid and self-existent, and in reality they are dependent on other things, and if those causes are removed, they will no longer exist. If you don't get this, don't worry. We're going to go over it again and again until it goes click. The second truth is ultimate truth. This is when something appears the way it really is. Now, only a Buddha can see things this way all the time, because they are able to see ultimate truth and also deceptive reality at the same time. The rest of us see ultimate truth or ultimate reality or emptiness, which are all three terms that can be used interchangeably, only in deep meditation. And from our normal point of view, ultimate truth is how things appear to be one way when they are really another way. For instance, the cylinder appears to be a self-existent pen when it's not really a pen, because if it was really a pen, then everyone would see it as a pen. Each object possesses these two truths. So each object, each thing, each person, each plant, each writing utensil, everything possesses these two realities. Let's consider the pen. Its deceptive reality, or its deceptive truth, is that it is a self-existent pen, meaning it isn't caused by anything. It just is all by itself. So when you look at the pen, its deceptive reality is that it looks like it just is there all by itself, that there's nothing working behind the scenes. Its ultimate reality is that it is not the way it appears to be. Now, these two realities are almost saying the same thing. The distinction between the two is that one is a positive statement and the other is a negative statement. Deceptive truth is the positive. It is what the object is or has. The cylinder is a pen. The cylinder has penness, we could say. It's got some sort of penness that we just can then recognize. The ultimate truth is a negative view. It is what the object isn't or doesn't have. It is the absence of something. The pen isn't how it appears to be. It lacks self-existence. Every object has these two realities. And from our point of view, one of them seems like a positive view, what an object has, which is what we're seeing, a deceptive truth. And then the other one is like what a negative view, what it lacks, that it isn't really the way it appears. Now, Buddha can see both of these realities at once, and they see the ultimate truth, it actually is how it appears, because they're seeing it from a different view. From our point of view, we've got these two things happening at the same time. And every object has these two realities, and understanding this is necessary for reaching nirvana. And we're going to tie this stuff together in our next class when we talk about how karma and emptiness work together. So it's going to make a little bit more sense then too. This brings us to dependent origination. Dependent origination is a way to explain the deceptive reality of things. So it's just as the title says, that things' origin, meaning where it comes from, is dependent on something. So everything exists dependent on something else is what dependent origination means. And what it's dependent on depends on the school of thought. And we'll just go over that next. But dependent originate is the positive way explaining the way things are. So again, I'm kind of just emphasizing, because emptiness is not a positive thing, it's a negative thing, it's an absence of something, which is important in terms of being able to understand what it is. So there's three views of dependent origination that we're going to present. And the Buddha taught all these three views depending on what the capacity of his audience, who he was teaching to. The first one is that things are dependent on their causes. This is pretty straightforward. If we look at the pen, it is dependent on the plastic and the ink, and it's maybe dependent on the people who built it, and the factory, and the who shipped it out. So it's dependent on its causes. All these things went into that pen being here. This view is limited in that it doesn't explain things like space and emptiness, which are not caused. And so when I'm talking about space, I don't mean outer space. I mean the space that things occupy. So we've got this pen, right? And wherever it's sitting right now, it's occupying a certain space. And if we move the pen, the space will still be there. but the pen it'll be unoccupied space then, or something else will occupy it. So space is something that's not caused. You don't create it, you can't destroy it. Things move in and out of it, but it's not a caused thing. So it doesn't fit into being dependent on its cause. So the next view is that went to explain this. Even things like space have parts. We've got an east side and a west side of the space, or the right side and the left side of a space. So this other view of dependent origination is that all things exist dependent on their parts. So if things don't have parts, they don't exist. And this is true of even the smallest little particles. If you think down to an atom, there's always going to be a right side and a left side of anything. Even as we get smaller and smaller and smaller, everything's going to have a right side and a left side, or a top and a bottom. So this is a greater depth of understanding than the first view, but we can still go a little bit deeper. That all things exist dependent on you calling them and thinking of them as you do. So this is a little bit more subtler view. And it's talking about that unless I call this pen a pen, it doesn't exist, right? In the sense that it's not a pen. The dog comes in, it sees it, it says, hey, this is a chew toy. Hey, give me that. Hey, throw that chew toy. I want to grab it, run with it. So you've got the pen not existing until a being thinks about it or labels it. And even within that school of dependent origination, there's even more subtle levels. Because I'm kind of saying, hey, there's a cylinder out there. There's something that we look at and we say, hey, I think that has a little bit of pen in it. Or the dog looks at it and says, hey, that looks like a chew toy to me. But even as you go down deeper and deeper, you realize that even whatever we're projecting that label onto is also a projection. And we'll talk more about that. But we'll just keep it at this level at this point. So this is the positive view, that things are dependent on their causes, things exist dependent on their parts, or things exist dependent on me calling them something. The negative view is going to be what emptiness is. And emptiness is the absence of something. So I've got the three positive views up on the screen. So the emptiness of something, if a thing is dependent on their causes, what would be the negative statement would be that things do not exist independent of their causes. So things do not exist independent of their causes. Number two, well, things do not exist independent of their parts. And the final one would, of course, be things do not exist independent of you calling them or naming them. Or you could simply say things do not exist outside of your mind, which is where that one ultimately leads to. So emptiness is the absence of something existing independent of its causes, something existing independent of its parts, or something existing independent of being labeled, depending on what school of thought you're in. So we presented three different views of dependent origination. How things depend on different things to actually exist. And they don't exist unless those other qualities are there. This brings us to the four ancient schools of Buddhism in India. So when Buddha taught, he taught these different views and a lot of little different concepts. But the four ancient schools of Buddhism were really grouped depending on major views on how emptiness, or what the definition of emptiness is. And like I just said, Buddha taught all of them, so which one's right? Well, they're all right. And the idea is that as we go up through them, starting with the functionalist schools, that the idea of emptiness becomes a little bit more sophisticated. And we actually like to think of our view in this lineage as being Prasangika, which is the highest school. It's the upper half of the middle way school. So view one, the functionalist schools, there's Abhidhamma school, which is sometimes known as the knowledge school, Svatrantika school, or the sutra school, also known as the logic school, and the Chittamatra school or Yogacara school, which is the mind-only school, and we usually just call it the mind-only school. Those three schools fall into the view one. They all believe that things are dependent. They exist dependent on their causes. The Madhyamika, or middle way schools, fall into the sections for view 2 and view 3. So the Svatantrika school, the independent school, and notice how it's spelt real similar to the Sutrantika school up in the functionalist schools. Just a little bit different, that pronunciation. Svatantrika falls into the second view, which is that things exist dependent on their parts. The highest school, Prasangika, or the highest view, is going to be that things dependent on our labeling them. So those are the three views, and how the 4 ancient schools of Buddhism fall into those. And this is a good chart to keep handy, because as we go through the different courses, we're actually going to present information from a point of view of a specific school. Usually each course has got a different school that we're looking at. And so to kind of know where they all fall in their systems is valuable, where they fall together. Self. So you've probably heard in Buddhism this concept of no self. So in order to know what no self is, or what we're denying exists, we need to know what a self is. So in English we say self. In Tibetan it's called dak. And then in Sanskrit it's Atman. And Atman also refers to some sort of God kind of thing. So the definition of self in this context is that it's an essence of things that don't depend on others. So a self is the essence of a thing. Something has its self. So it doesn't necessarily mean human. It could be anything's got a self. And it doesn't depend on others. It's an intrinsic nature. When we're looking at humans, it's a similar concept as soul, which we kind of look at. And again, you probably haven't thought about how you really define soul, but the idea of soul is that it was a permanent, unchanging thing. That your soul goes on, and it's always been, it always will be, and it never changes. That part of you doesn't change. So in order to know, okay, what is no self, we need to understand that we're looking at something. When we talk about self, it's some sort of intrinsic, unchanging thing. Which brings us to the gotcha, which is the object we deny, which is really the no self. This is the object we're denying. So, depending on which school of thought, we're going to be denying different things. In the functionalist school of thought, we're denying that a self that has no causes exists. So we're saying there is no such thing as a self that has no causes. That's our gotcha. So in order to exist, you have to have a cause. Functionalist says the self that has no causes is the object we deny. Independence, they say that the self that exists independent of its parts does not exist. So the gotcha, the object we're denying, this is the 5-headed purple full-size elephant, right? This is a thing that does not exist, that we could probably make up, but it doesn't exist for real, right? So the self that exists independent of its parts doesn't exist for the independence. We're saying there's no way you can't have a pen that doesn't have a right side and a left side. It's got to have both. Finally, the consequence or implication school, that's Prasangikas, we're going to say that the self that exists independent of my thinking about it or naming it doesn't exist. So a pen, that's a pen, and we look at it this way: a pen from its own side doesn't exist. If something that looks like a pen comes to me and it's a pen from its own side, it doesn't exist. It's dependent on me, my side, coming over and looking at that cylinder and saying, hey, you're a pen. Because otherwise, if it had penness from its own side, if it was broadcasting, hey, I'm a pen, then a dog would come in and say, hey, that's a pen. I'm not going to chew on that. So this is the object we deny. We deny that there's a pen that's a pen independent of us naming it or calling it that. There's no such thing. Otherwise, a dog would recognize it as being a pen and wouldn't even bother chewing on it. That brings us to the end of Class 9. You'll have your usual questions in the homework, and your memorization assignment is to memorize the 10th verse of the 3 principal paths, which goes, a person has entered the path that pleases the Buddhas when for all objects, in the cycle and beyond, he sees that cause and effect can never fail, and when for him they lose all solid appearance. Your meditation assignments will be doing 15 minutes each day on the 3 meanings of interdependence, which is another way of saying dependent origination, how things are interdependent on other things, whether they be cause or parts or your projection of naming them. And remember to record the date and time of your meditation. The next class we're going to put this all together. The importance of these views is how emptiness and karma work together. And so we'll really be talking about the nature of wisdom and of liberation, how to get out of this. So this is incredible virtue. We have just studied correct view, beginning the studies of emptiness. And so let's dedicate our virtue to the benefit of all sentient beings. Bless you.